It was mass hysteria. And this reaction is what Tom Petty picked up on. It was nothing to do with music. He saw how the crowd, how the masses responded to Elvis Presley, and he thought, I'll be having me some of that. It's great.
The young Petty was also caught up in the wave of new rock bands from not only his home country, but also the British invasion of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Tom Petty himself would say that, like a lot of young American musicians of his age, that the Beatles on Ed Sullivan was a huge, huge deal.
Anybody who picked up a guitar, who rocked a bit, was influenced by the Rolling Stones. But the real key for Tom Petty and to understanding most of Tom Petty's work is the Byrds. He not only had that guitar twang and that the patented high lonesome sound, but he also had the harmonies and the beauty of West Coast American pop.
To everything, turn, turn, turn.
The wonderful jingle jangle sound of the Byrds was down to a 12-string Rickenbacker. And I think Tom Petty took up the 12-string as well, so you get that lovely 60s-ish jangling sound. And I think that's kind of been the key to Tom Petty's appeal. He always had a touch of that, the sort of slightly more innocent folk rock sound of the 60s.
After being taught guitar by Don Felder, who would later join the Eagles, Petty formed his first band, Mudcrutch. They enjoyed little success and soon disbanded once moving to LA. But Petty kept in touch with members Mike Campbell and Benmont Tench. With Ron Blair and Stan Lynch added to the group, they formed Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in 1976.
Rock and roll is definitely not born in Florida. It's quite a sleepy place and not known for the kind of wilder side of life and the more exciting side of life.
I think Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, if you asked them today, they would regard themselves as Californians. They certainly took off at a very young age. I think they were all about 17 when they first headed over to Los Angeles and did the rounds of all the record labels, trying to shop around for a deal. So they saw it as this kind of fantasy land where all these bands that they'd loved and fallen in love with were hailed from.
Their self-titled debut album was released the next year. It didn't find immediate success in the US, but was a hit in the UK.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers had a very English sound. It was produced by the Englishman Denny Cordell. America at that time was into Chicago, it was into Peter Frampton, and people who wore leather jackets and had 3-minute rock songs, then America didn't really understand them.
They actually went on tour with Nils Lofgren and went to the UK and actually started to build up a following there first, which kind of seems odd for an American act to go and do that, but sometimes that happens.
In England, punk rock was just starting, but also there was the more grittier end of pub rock, where you had early Elvis Costello, where you had Graham Parker, and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers fitted right into that. They sounded English, and the time was right for them in Britain.
I think the UK has a great history of breaking bands from America before America realized what they have. You know, even to this day, bands like the Kings of Leon, the Strokes, the Killers, all broke in the UK first because it's just a much smaller place. You know, they don't have to do the endless radio station tours. It's nationalized radio, and it just means that, you know, they can cover more ground quickly. American Girl was one of the great songs to come off their debut album, and I think it's still one of the finest Tom Petty songs. It's just got this real jittery energy, and it just makes me want to kind of drive down the coast with the top down.
Probably his first truly, truly great song that he wrote, and it's become a complete standard. It's just full of romance and immediacy, and it's just a great American song.
She was an American girl.
I think pretty much everyone, Tom Petty included, would say that that is his calling card, if you
but still based in kind of rock and roll songs.
In 1981, the band entered the studio to record their follow-up, Hard Promises. After Petty and his distributor MCA fell into a dispute over its retail price, the album would turn Petty into a friend of the record-buying public, as well as continuing his commercial success.
One of the reasons I like Tom Petty is because he's pretty ballsy. So in 1979, when his record label was sold to another record label, he kicked up a huge fuss because he said he didn't want to be sold like a piece of meat. He stood up for what he believed in. Another instance is when one label wanted to sell his album for $9.98 instead of $8.98, and he took umbrage with the extra dollar and kicked up a fuss, and then eventually the record label had to listen to him.
He's got a tradition of fighting against the man and fighting against oppression. I Won't Back Down, his track, is actually about that, bigger, higher powers, and I think it was definitely about his kind of wrangles with major record labels.
The album featured a song called Insider, a duet with Fleetwood Mac singer Stevie Nicks. It would begin a friendship that would eventually lead to Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks touring and performing together.
Tom Petty sometimes calls Stevie Nicks the honorary heartbreaker because they did a couple of duets, a song called Insider and a song on her debut solo album called Stop Dragging My Heart Around.
There's rumours of romantic involvement that they both denied, but they certainly clicked on a musical level, and we've gone to duet over the years. And both of those songs demonstrate there's just a great relationship between their voices.
I love both duets, actually. I think they bring out a softer side of his music, and she's just a genius. So hearing them together was really kind of inspiring.
1985 would see Petty collaborate with another prominent musician of the era. The song Don't Come Around Here No More from the Heartbreakers album Southern Accents was co-written with the Eurythmics' Dave Stewart.
Don't come around here no more. Don't come around here no more.
Tom Petty teamed up with Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics for the song Don't Come Around Here No More, which was mostly notable because of this very trippy video, which got a lot of rotation on MTV at the time. So it had an Alice in Wonderland theme, it had Dave Stewart as this hookah-smoking caterpillar, and Tom Petty looking frankly slightly creepy, and Alice kind of wandering around in all these strange situations, and she ends up as a piece of cake, which everybody's eating.
Longer of giving up on its love, getting stronger.
I'm not sure it kind of works with the song particularly, but it's an interesting piece of work. I kind of respect them for doing it, and it certainly must have stuck out like a sore thumb when kind of people saw it at the time. So yeah, respect is due for it.
that Tom Petty is known for.
In 1987, the band formed a friendship with Bob Dylan and supported him on his True Confessions tour. Dylan became an influence as well as a contributor to the album Let Me Up, I've Had Enough.
If you read interviews with them about that time, the amount that they learnt off Dylan, because of the way he plays, he'll just change songs in a heartbeat and he might sing them in a different key, and you just have to be ready and you have to be on your toes all the time, and it's really rough and ready.
As opposed to his previous work with the Heartbreakers and his solo record, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, had a bit more of a raw live feel, which I think you could attribute to Bob Dylan.
It was him going raw and using a kind of live sound that I think was a technique that he borrowed from Dylan. And it was just interesting to hear a kind of more ragged kind of side to his work.
You ended up with the almost bizarre spectacle of Bob Dylan and Tom Petty touring the world together with the Heartbreakers, including Tom Petty, as Bob Dylan's backing band. And, by all accounts, everyone had a fine old time. Tom Petty and Bob Dylan were and remain kindred spirits. They're both people who very much gone their own way. And that's why they understand, like, and respect each other.
Dylan and Petty continued working together and teamed up with Roy Orbison and George Harrison to form the supergroup The Travelling Wilburys, who would create 2 studio albums together.
Add Roy Orbison and that pushes it somewhere else. He's got these kind of beautiful operatic vocals. So I think, like, for those artists to see that that would work when they came from such kind of different areas, I think was inspired.
Everybody comes out of it with credit. You can hear little bits of all of them in every song that the Wilburys did, and it still sounds like a coherent whole. These people, they didn't so much, as the old cliche has it, leave their egos at the door. They didn't. They brought their talents and put them into the big old melting pot.
The 90s began with Petty returning to the Heartbreakers for the album Into the Great Wide Open. The video for the single of the same name featured a future superstar.
Another one of Tom Petty's seminal videos is Into the Great Wide Open, which was a massive radio hit at the time, but also it had this video which featured Faye Dunaway and Johnny Depp, and at the very end, a tiny cameo by former friend Matt LeBlanc. It follows Johnny Depp as this hapless wannabe rock star, and he goes to Hollywood, and then he becomes massive and an egomaniac, and then he falls from grace.
He initially promised it to Stevie Nicks, but it was so good that he decided, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to keep that one for myself.
The key scene to this video is the final scene where the Johnny Depp character, who is at the end of his career, goes into a tattooist's. At the beginning of his career, he had a tattoo made. This tattoo involved a heart. And as the Johnny Depp figure got more popular, the heart in the tattoo slowly disappeared. And you see that that is how Tom Petty views the music industry, as a machine which churns talent out. Now, when the Johnny Depp figure gets into the tattooists, he sees his replacement, who, irony of ironies, is having the exact same tattoo that Johnny Depp had put on his own arm.
Petty signed to Warner's for his second solo album, Wildflowers, after producer Rick Rubin had reignited Johnny Cash's career with the defining American recordings. Petty approached Rubin for a stripped-back release.
It was quite a surprising choice at the time because Rick Rubin was kind of associated with rap and heavy metal. But what he did with Tom Petty was kind of strip everything right back. So it was more of a folksy, rootsy, Neil Young vibe.
For a guy like Tom Petty to be making a record as good as Wildflowers, In 1994, so long after he peaked in the 80s with Full Moon Fever, it's just incredible that he could make a record as strong as that.
I certainly would have expected Wildflowers to sound more of a collaborative effort than it did. And I think when you hear it, it's very clear that Rick Rubin compromised a lot of his production techniques and a lot of his production skills. And Tom Petty, by contrast, didn't compromise very much, as is Tom Petty's way.
Petty and the Heartbreakers have remained a collective and continue to produce new music. They cemented their status with the American public when they performed at the Super Bowl in 2008.
Super Bowl is, of course, the quintessential American event. To have Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the quintessential American band, playing this at half-time was a great American experience. And of course they were fantastic.
In America, they continue to be a gigantic deal when they play stadiums and arenas wherever they go. But in England, they get name-checked by a lot of modern bands, and a lot of young musicians are really into them and really into his integrity. And just him as a rock and roll star, he stands by what he believes in. And they're just one of those bands that will be able to tour as they are for years.
Of Tom Petty, even now, is very, very strong in American indie rock bands. So they have this thing called Petty Fest, which has been going on for several years now. And they play in New York and LA and recently in San Francisco, and it's where a bunch of guys from famous bands get together and play Tom Petty songs. So recently, you know, it was like a member of the Killers, some of the Strokes, Johnny Depp showed up, you know, Sarah Silverman came along, Kesha sang a song. So that just goes to show how kind of wide-reaching Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers music is.
I think actually, if you look back now, there's a lot of great songs, and also what he did was he kept the spirit of the kind of 60s rock and roll, but it was for a later time.
I think it's great that the band's still going strong, they're still writing stuff, it's still doing well, it's still critically acclaimed, and he's still kind of pushing things sonically. It's amazing.
It's pretty impressive that over the years, and given Tom Petty's solo success, that he's always returned to the Heartbreakers. And I think that's just really a testament to their friendship and realizing that they have a real musical chemistry together.
Their musicianship hasn't dimmed. Tom Petty hasn't been an artist who has thrown a lot of stylistic curveballs. And who better to have on board in this journey through the decades as the people he knows and trusts, and the people who know and trust him.
Well, I found you.